Hello, friends. Welcome back. Today, I want to share with you a story that stayed with me, not because it was dramatic or terrifying, but because it was quiet and deeply real. It's called The Cross That Wouldn't Fall. It begins in a small town like many others. Nothing famous, nothing extraordinary, just people trying to get by, like everywhere else. Then came the storm, a fierce one, loud, brutal, angry. It tore through the town, ripped up trees, shattered windows, and left homes in pieces. When the sun finally rose, the town was nearly unrecognizable. But in front of the old church, there it was, an old stone crucifix, still standing, untouched, not even scratched. Some people shrugged it off, but others started to come back. They came to look, then they came to kneel, then to cry, then to believe. Something began to change, in the town, in people's hearts, and in me. My name's Jack. I'm just a carpenter. I had walked away from the church years ago. I didn't think I'd ever look back. But what happened around that cross, what I saw, what I felt, what I couldn't explain, brought me back to something I thought I'd lost for good. This story isn't about proof. It's about presence. It's about what stays standing, even when everything else falls apart. So if you're ready, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Night Everything Fell. My name is Jack Moretti, and I was never one for miracles. Not for lack of hearing about them. This town talks like a prayer book half the time, but because I learned early that belief doesn't stop the world from breaking. And when the world breaks enough times, you stop expecting anything sacred to survive. I'm 38 now, and I make my living as a carpenter. Wood responds better than people. It listens, bends, yields. You can sand down the rough edges and shape it into something that holds. I never found faith to be so cooperative. St. Agnes Church had always stood at the edge of Bellbrooke like a mother watching her children from the porch. Tall, solemn, and made of old stone that turned gold in the early morning light. My mother used to drag me there every Sunday, combing my hair and making me wear those stiff shoes that pinched. But she died when I was 16, and I stopped going not long after. I didn't hate the church. I just didn't see the point. God had his house, and I had mine, and we kept our separate addresses. That was before the storm. The day it came, the sky felt off, not just gray, not just heavy, but strange. The birds flew wrong. I remember standing on my porch that morning with a cup of coffee, watching a flock twist sharply east, like they'd changed their minds mid-flight. They didn't sing, they just flew, fast and low, as if chased. The air was too still, the kind of still that makes you think you've gone deaf. Even the old wind chimes by the bakery stayed silent. I should have known, maybe part of me did. But you don't cancel your plans just because the trees stop swaying. You tell yourself it's nothing, that you've lived through worse. By nightfall, the clouds had swallowed the stars. I was in my workshop, trying to finish a table for Mrs. DeWitt. She's been asking for it since Christmas. The wind started around 8 p.m., soft at first, like breath through teeth. Then came the thunder. It wasn't the usual kind. It didn't roll. It cracked. It snapped. like something enormous was walking overhead and breaking the sky beneath each step. I lost power at 9:14. I remember because I looked at my watch the moment the lights flickered out and the radio went dead. I lit candles. I checked the window. Rain slammed against the glass sideways, like it hated me personally. Trees were bending, some to impossible angles, and then I heard it, the siren. Bellbrooke doesn't have many sirens. We have one for tornadoes and one for fires. This was neither. This was long, rising, and low, the sound of something ancient waking up. And then came the flash. It lit the sky with a kind of blue you don't see in nature. So bright it left afterimages. And it hit something tall. I couldn't see what, but I heard the scream of metal and the boom that followed. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the hallway, away from the windows, clutching the old rosary my mother had left behind in her drawer. I hadn't touched it in years. That night, I couldn't let it go. By morning, it was over. Bellbrooke looked like it had been gutted. Roofs were peeled back like sardine cans. Trees lay sprawled across roads like sleeping giants. Power lines sagged or snapped. The gas station was half collapsed. I walked. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet took me towards St. Agnes. I expected to find rubble. Maybe the bell tower fallen. Maybe the doors blown open. I expected glass, stone, and silence. And I did find silence, but not the dead kind, the listening kind. The front steps of the church were cracked. The old oak doors hung askew. The steeple, the one that had taken the lightning, was blackened, its cross leaning slightly like a weary traveler. But there, in the courtyard, where the old stone crucifix stood for over 100 years, it was untouched. No debris around it, no scourge marks, no dirt. It stood as if placed by an invisible hand, untouched by the rage that had consumed the rest of the town. I walked closer. My boots crushed glass, twigs, and wet leaves, but the closer I came, the quieter the world got. And when I reached it, I swear I heard something. Not a voice, not a sound, but a presence, like the earth holding its breath. The stone figure of Christ gazed down, weather-worn and faceless from time, yet somehow alive. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, hours. Time didn't work right around that thing. I didn't pray. I didn't weep. I just stood, and something in me stirred. Not a feeling, not yet, but a knowing. Something had been spared, and not just the cross. Something inside me, too. That was the beginning. People talk about signs and wonders like they're fireworks, big, loud, undeniable. But this was something else. Something quieter. Something that doesn't demand belief but invites it. The storm had taken nearly everything, but the cross hadn't fallen. And maybe, just maybe, neither had I. Chapter 2. The Untouched Stone. It didn't take long for word to spread. In a town like Bellbrooke, where the coffee shop is still the best source of news and everyone knows everyone else's childhood secrets, something like an unbroken cross in the midst of a natural disaster becomes more than just a curiosity. It becomes a story, and stories, in places like this, have a way of becoming scripture. By noon on the second day, they started to come. I was already there when the first visitors arrived. I hadn't planned to be. I'd told myself I was only passing through on my way to check on Mr. Fulton's property. But something I didn't have the courage to name, pulled me back to St. Agnes. To the courtyard, to the stone crucifix that hadn't so much as flinched in the face of the storm. It stood just as I'd left it, unmoved, untouched, and impossibly serene. But the space around it felt different now. Charged, maybe, or emptied out, like something heavy had left and something holier had taken its place. The first to arrive was a young couple, Ryan and Eliza. I think they parked their rusted pickup just beyond the fallen maple tree and made their way through the rubble. Eliza clutched a toddler in her arms, and Ryan carried a lantern even though the sun was up. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. They just stood there, staring. And then Eliza did something strange. She reached into her coat and pulled out a tiny white flower. Crushed at the edges, probably a gardenia, she knelt, carefully, knees on broken earth, and placed it at the foot of the cross. She whispered something, then they left. By the third day, the crowd had grown, not like a festival. There was no laughter, no booths, no noise, just a steady stream of people walking slowly toward the courtyard like they were entering something sacred. I saw all kinds, old women with rosaries, teenagers with earbuds still dangling, men with the hardened look of those who had seen too much of the world to believe in fairy tales. And yet, there they were. Some stood, some sat, some cried, most said nothing. One afternoon, I saw her, Rosa. She'd once been the soul of this parish. Choir director, cook for church socials, teacher for Sunday school. But after her only son, Miguel, died in Iraq, she vanished. Some say she moved to Oregon. Others claimed she joined some fringe movement. Truth is, she just stopped singing, stopped coming, stopped believing. I hadn't seen her in 6 years. And there she was, old, thinner than I remembered, her gray hair tucked beneath a faded scarf. She shuffled toward the cross like her bones remembered something her mind had long abandoned. I didn't want to intrude. I watched from a distance as she stood there, silent, and then she fell to her knees. Not a graceful kneel, either. Her body just buckled, and she wept, loud, broken sobs, the kind that shake loose something in everyone who hears them. No one moved, no one dared. I felt like I was witnessing something private, and yet it felt like it belonged to all of us. Later, I found a note pinned beneath a small stone at the base of the cross. It was hers. I recognized the handwriting from the parish newsletters she used to type. It said only, "You never stopped waiting, did you?" Then came Theo, a boy of 7, brown curls, pale, solemn eyes. He'd lost his father in the storm. The old mechanic's shop had collapsed, and they hadn't found the man's body until 2 days later. Pinned beneath a wall, Theo came with his aunt. She looked lost. He looked like someone who had aged in 3 nights. He didn't speak to anyone, just walked right up to the cross and sat down, cross-legged, hands folded, and there he stayed, for hours, sometimes murmuring, sometimes just breathing. At one point, a dog passed by and licked his cheek. He smiled. It was small, but it was there. When his aunt tried to coax him home, he said, "Daddy's not gone. He's just quieter now." She cried the rest of the walk back. Father Jules finally returned from the neighboring parish that had offered temporary shelter. He looked tired, older somehow, though only a week had passed. When he saw the cross, he removed his hat and just stood there, mouth slightly open. "Still here," he whispered. He approached it like someone approaching a relic. He touched the base with his hand, closed his eyes, and nodded. That evening, he began keeping a small journal. I saw it once, in the sacristy, a worn leather notebook with the words, "Testimonies of Stone," carved in ink on the inside cover. He started writing down what people told him, visions, dreams, feelings, healings, not all dramatic. Some were just moments of stillness, or clarity, or peace. Some folks scoffed, said people were seeing what they wanted to see. But others knew something had changed, including me. I didn't have a vision, didn't hear a voice, but I started returning every day. At first just to watch, then to sit, then, eventually, to speak, not to anyone else, to him, not in polished prayers, not in churchy words, just in truth. I told him I was tired. I told him I didn't know what I believed. I told him I missed my mother. I told him I was scared of how small I felt. And I didn't hear anything back. But the silence felt different now. Less empty, more expectant, like I wasn't talking to myself anymore. The ground around the cross began to change. Grass grew back faster there. Flowers, wild ones, pushed up through the cracks. Someone placed a wooden bench nearby. Another brought candles. It wasn't organized, no one led it, but somehow a sanctuary formed out of ruin, and in the center, untouched and immovable, stood the stone Christ, not as a decoration, not as a monument, but as a question, and slowly, for many of us, as an answer. Chapter 3. Witnesses of Wonder. There's something quiet that settles around a place after the crowds leave. You'd think it would be emptier, more hollow, but it's not. It's deeper, like the walls, or the trees, or the very air has absorbed all that passed through it. And once again, I found myself coming back to the cross at St. Agnes every day. As if drawn by some thread I couldn't see. I wasn't the only one. In the days that followed Rosa's return and little Theo's strange peace, others began showing up, people I hadn't seen in years, or never thought would find their way to a church courtyard again. Each came with something heavy, something unspeakable, but the cross, they all stopped there. Some stayed silent, some wept, some whispered things into the stone. I watched them from a distance, not because I didn't want to speak, but because I felt like I was standing in the back pew of some divine confession, one where words weren't always needed. And healing came in waves. One morning, Linda showed up. She used to work at the county clinic, sharp-tongued, good with a needle, and quicker than most men in a crisis. We'd gone to high school together, though I barely remembered her beyond a few hallway nods. Now she looked thinner, hollowed out. She didn't notice me. She walked straight up to the cross, a bundle of something clutched in her hands. She kneeled. I looked away, out of instinct, but the breeze shifted, and I caught her voice, barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said. I didn't know what else to do back then. I watched her lay down the bundle, baby clothes, faded blue, washed too many times. She pressed her forehead to the ground, shoulders shaking. That night, I stayed longer than usual. When I came back the next day, the bundle was still there, but someone had tucked a white lily into it, and Linda was sitting on the bench, her eyes red but calm. She looked at me and said, "I thought he'd hate me, but he didn't. He just waited." Then came Tom. He'd been a town drunk for as long as I could remember. Used to fix cars. Before the drinking took that from him too. I hadn't seen him sober in years. But he walked into the courtyard one evening as the sun was bleeding out across the sky. He looked rough, like someone who'd spent the night in a ditch, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not pain, just clarity. He stood in front of the cross, swaying a little. Then he spoke, not to anyone in particular. "I saw him," he said, "not like in a dream, not like a picture, but like someone looking right at me. Past all the crap, all the rot, right into the middle of me." Nobody replied, nobody scoffed. Tom sat down on the steps, pulled out a flask, looked at it for a long time, and then he poured it out into the dirt. Didn't say a word, just sat there. But the one that shook me most was the photographer. Name was Caleb, from the city. He came with a big camera, a shaved head, and the kind of attitude that said, "I don't do faith." He told Father Jules he was doing a series on post-disaster symbolism, that he'd heard about the stone cross that miraculously survived, and figured it would make a good shot. He walked around the courtyard for hours, took pictures from every angle, macro shots of the base, sunlight through the arms, black and white compositions. He was methodical, focused. I tried talking to him, but he didn't seem interested. Said he believed in things you could prove, measure, capture. The next day, he came back, confused, agitated. "Every picture I took," he said, "except for the ones of the cross, they're all fine. But every single shot of the crucifix, gone. The files are corrupted, just static." He showed us images turned into bands of gray, or just pure white. Some had strange streaks, like fingerprints pressed against the lens from the inside. He tried again, took more pictures. Same result. He switched cameras, came back the next morning. Third time, nothing. He sat down beside me on the bench, ran a hand through his hair. "I don't get it," he said. "It's stone. It's just a damn rock." But he didn't sound angry, just hollow. Later that week, I saw him kneeling, no camera, just him, eyes closed, lips moving, maybe asking, maybe apologizing, maybe both, and the cross remained, still, unaffected, unmoving. Yet around it, the world shifted, something gentle, but undeniable, a scent, sometimes like frankincense, or roses, or rain on dry earth. Birds began to land on the cross, not dozens, just one or two, always still, always watching. The wind would hush when people prayed. Trees nearby stayed greener, even as summer began to fade. And above all, a kind of peace settled there, not the peace you feel in empty silence, but the kind that wraps around your grief and refuses to let go. People talked of strange dreams, of hearing their names whispered in the wind, of feeling seen when they hadn't been seen in years. Some mocked it, but most didn't. Because when you've stood in a place where so many burdens were laid down, you stop caring whether it fits in a box labeled science or faith. You just know, and I began to know. I wasn't healed, I wasn't whole, but I was no longer alone. The cross hadn't fallen, and neither would we. Chapter 4. The Priest's Burden. I had never known Father Jules to hesitate. He was a man of steady rhythm and quiet resolve, the kind of priest who spoke softly but left the pews thoughtful. He'd been at St. Agnes for over 20 years, and even those who no longer believed respected him. He was, in many ways, the last familiar shepherd in a world that had long since stopped tending its flock. But lately, I noticed something had shifted in him. He still wore the same threadbare cassock, still polished the chalice by hand, still rang the old bronze bell each morning for those who cared to hear it. But his eyes, those steady, smoke-gray eyes, held something new: wonder and worry. One evening, after most had left the courtyard, I found him kneeling before the stone crucifix, his fingers moving absently along the worn beads of his rosary. I didn't want to disturb him, but before I could turn to leave, he spoke. "Did you know," he said, "that the cross was built after a plague?" I stepped closer. "No, I didn't." He nodded, still not looking at me. 1911. The Spanish influenza didn't hit us until later. But that year, something else came. Some say it was cholera. Others believed it was God's wrath. The town lost over 100 souls in 2 months. Small town. Back then, it nearly broke them. He finally looked up at the crucifix. His voice was distant, almost reverent. They gathered what they had: granite, hauled in from the river hills. The men carved, the women prayed, and when they raised the cross on this very ground, they didn't ask for healing. He paused, eyes narrowing. They asked for forgiveness. That stayed with me. Not healing, not salvation, forgiveness. Father Jules seemed more reflective after that day. He spent longer hours in the chapel, often alone. I'd pass by the open door and see him on his knees before the tabernacle, or standing in the pulpit rehearsing homilies to an empty nave. He spoke more gently during Mass, even to the few who bothered to attend. His sermons changed: less doctrine, more heart. He spoke of mercy like it was a person who could sit beside you. He spoke of wounds that bleed in silence. He stopped asking us to believe and started asking us to return. And more people did, not in droves, but steadily, quietly, like birds finding their way back to a forgotten perch. But the cross troubled him. He told me once, over a lukewarm cup of tea in the rectory kitchen, I should be rejoicing. He said, people are praying again, confessing, hoping, but I keep asking myself, what if I'm wrong? What if it's not a miracle? I didn't know how to respond. He set the cup down, rubbing his temples. I'm a priest, Jack. I've given my life to mystery. But even mystery has a shape. This has none. The cross doesn't defy logic, it defies indifference. It refuses to be ignored, and I don't know what that means. I remember nodding, because I felt it too. That sense of something just out of reach, not threatening, but vast. A few nights later, he called me at nearly 2 a.m. His voice was shaking. I need to speak with someone. He said. I drove through the sleeping town, past windows that flickered with candlelight, past branches that tapped on roofs like fingers. The rectory door was already open when I arrived. Father Jules sat in the chapel, his back to me. When he turned, his face was pale. His hands trembled as he poured tea, sloshing a bit onto the saucer. I had a dream, he said. I sat. The storm had returned. He whispered, but worse. The sky ripped open. The wind screamed like souls in torment. I was standing outside, barefoot, soaked, clutching the Bible to my chest. He paused, and then I saw it. The cross. It wasn't just standing, it was glowing. Not like sunlight, like fire beneath the stone. A light that didn't burn but revealed. I felt a chill crawl up my arms. What did it reveal? I asked. He looked at me, eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before, fear and awe. Myself, as I was, as I am, every doubt, every prideful thought, every time I preached what I didn't practice. It showed me, and yet it didn't condemn. It embraced. Tears welled up in his eyes. I woke up crying. He said, not from fear, from relief. He leaned forward, clasping my hand. Jack, this cross, it's not just surviving. It's speaking, not with words, but with presence. I didn't know what to say, but I didn't pull my hand away. Because I believed him, not because of the dream, not even because of the miracle, but because he, the man I had trusted since childhood, was trembling in the presence of something holy, and he was not ashamed. In the days that followed, he spoke of the dream to others. Carefully, prayerfully, he didn't use it to command. He used it to invite. People listened, and more than that, people began to hope. Even me, even now. Chapter 5. Restoration. It's strange how quickly ruin can become renewal. In the weeks after the storm, you'd have thought we were still under siege. Tarps fluttered over broken roofs. Generators hummed their artificial heartbeat in backyards. Some houses were still too dangerous to enter. And every time it rained again, we all flinched just a little. But there was something else. Something moving beneath the surface like water under ice. A stirring, a change. I saw it in the way people lingered near the cross a little longer than before. I saw it in the quiet determination with which hands began to work, not just to rebuild, but to restore. And it wasn't just hammers and nails. It was hearts. At first, it started with the church. No one organized it formally. No sign-up sheets, no announcement. Just one morning, I came by and found old Mr. Penner, a retired roofer with knees gone soft, shuffling up the front steps with a ladder strapped to his back. "Can't let the rain keep getting in," he muttered, tapping the cracked tiles. By noon, 3 more men had joined him. Then the women came, scrubbing floors, washing linens, rehanging the stations of the cross that had fallen sideways during the quake. Someone brought a bucket of paint. Another brought flowers. Within days, the chapel had life again. Not perfect, not polished, but living. The bell rang again, and people came. At first, it was only a handful. The familiar ones, the elderly, the faithful, the ones whose rosaries never left their coat pockets. But then I saw others. Linda, Tom, even Caleb, the photographer. They came and sat in the back pews. No fanfare, just presence, and some of them knelt. Some even cried. Then came the confessions. The door to the confessional was dusted off. The old red curtain rehung. Father Jules sat inside, quietly, for hours at a time. I walked past once and saw a line in Bellbrooke, for confession. I couldn't tell you what they said, nor would I want to, but I saw what they looked like when they came out. Lighter, not fixed, but somehow freer. And then there were the baptisms. Not just babies, grown men, women who hadn't set foot in a church since Reagan. A few teenagers, too. They came to the font and touched the water like it might burn them, only to find it cool, gentle, and welcoming. They wept, they smiled, they returned. As for me, I change, too, but slower. I didn't run to the altar. I didn't sign up to help with repairs. I didn't take communion, but I came. Every night, just after sundown, I walked to the courtyard. I sat on the bench. Sometimes I knelt. Sometimes I just stared. I didn't always pray. I didn't know how anymore. But I remembered. I remembered my wife, Clara, gone 5 years now. She had prayed for me every day. That I'd come back, that I'd find my way. Even when I rolled my eyes or mocked the rituals, she'd smile and whisper a quiet Ave Maria under her breath. Her Bible still sat on our bookshelf, tucked between a cookbook and a photo album. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. One night, I pulled it down. The leather was worn, the pages brittle with love. Her notes were everywhere, soft cursive prayers, questions in the margins, underlined verses. I found one she'd marked with a ribbon. I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten. Joel chapter 2 verse 25. I don't know why that verse hit me so hard, but I wept, right there, alone in the kitchen, holding the book she once held. I wept for the years I'd lost, for the prayers I'd ignored, for the God I'd walked away from. And for the first time in years, I whispered something into the silence. Are you still listening? I didn't hear a voice, but I felt something, like warmth, like memory, like home. So I began reading, a few verses a night. Nothing grand, nothing scholarly, just words, ancient, strange, beautiful words. And I started talking again, not out loud, but in the quiet places, in my mind, in my heart, not with answers, just honesty. And the cross still stood. Every night, no matter the weather, it was there. And every night, I came. The town was healing. And maybe, just maybe, so was I. One evening, as I sat beneath the stars, I placed Clara's Bible at the foot of the cross. Just for a moment, a breeze lifted one of its pages, and I didn't stop it. Chapter 6. The Test. Not everything that grows draws welcome eyes. The movement, if that's what you wanted to call it, around the stone cross had begun with silence, with grief, with longing. But when things begin to shine, even quietly, they start to draw shadows. Not everyone who came to St. Agnes came seeking peace. Some came with questions, others with cameras, and a few came with something colder behind their eyes. It started when a major production company out of New York caught wind of the story. Some producer, slick suit, charming grin, voice like velvet over ice, showed up one morning with a small crew and a binder full of storyboards. They wanted to make a documentary, said it could be tasteful, said it would spread the message, said it would bring in donations, exposure. Father Jules met them on the steps of the church. I was there. I'd come to drop off a box of tools left behind from the last round of repairs. The priest listened patiently, nodding in all the right places. Then the producer dropped the suggestion to capture the full beauty of the crucifix. He said, "We'll need to move it, just temporarily. We can rig a crane, relocate it to a controlled set, get the light exactly right. Then we'll return it." Of course, just as it was, Father Jules didn't raise his voice, but the temperature dropped a degree. He looked at the man, then at the cross, then back. "If it will not fall in a storm," he said quietly, "it will not be moved for lens." The producer blinked, taken aback. "We're trying to honor it," he said. Father Jules smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile you give to make someone comfortable. Then kneel or leave. They left, but others came. A group calling themselves the Local Rationalists Alliance, though most folks just called them the No God Gang, began posting flyers around town. They claimed the cross was a tool of manipulation, a superstition being paraded as truth. Their leader, a wiry man named Dickie, used to be a science teacher. Now he spent most of his time on internet forums, crafting manifestos about the dangers of religious thought. At first, they just talked, then they picketed, then, one night, they came with tools. It was just past 2 a.m. when I heard the commotion. I lived close enough to St. Agnes that even the wind in the trees sometimes sounded like a sermon. But this was different. Metal clanging, footsteps, low voices. I slipped on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and headed toward the church. By the time I arrived, I saw them, 5 or 6 figures in dark jackets, standing around the cross with crowbars and a small generator-powered jackhammer. The generator wouldn't start. They pulled at the cord again and again. It sputtered, coughed, died. One of them cursed and pulled out a heavy mallet, walking up to the base of the crucifix. He raised it, and then he stopped. His hands trembled. He dropped the mallet and fell. No sound, no warning. He just crumpled to the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The others panicked. One dropped their crowbar and ran. Another knelt to check on the man. I rushed forward, heart pounding. He was breathing. Pulse was strong, but his eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, blank, as if something had looked back at him and he hadn't been ready. They left him there. When the ambulance came, the others were gone. Father Jules arrived shortly after. He stood beside me in the dark, looking down at the man as paramedics lifted him onto the stretcher. "Was it the cross?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he whispered, "No, it was what he carried into its presence." The story spread. Of course, some papers called it hysteria. Others called it divine justice. The town didn't know what to believe, but people started coming, more than before. They came from out of state, from neighboring towns, from across the country. Pilgrims, seekers, skeptics, broken people. Some camped near the edge of the woods. Others slept in their cars. A few knocked on doors. offering to trade work for lodging. They didn't ask for spectacle. They asked for stillness. They asked for something real. I spoke to a woman named Naomi, who'd driven 3 days from Ohio. She'd lost her son to suicide the year before. "I don't even know what I'm hoping for," she said, staring at the cross, "just that he sees me." Another man, Victor, came in a wheelchair. He'd been a priest once, lost his faith after an accident left him paralyzed. "I used to teach about miracles," he said. "Now I just want to believe they aren't always loud." The town adapted. The cafe started offering free coffee to travelers. The library opened its basement as a shelter. Locals began leaving boxes of bread and fruit near the church steps. And through it all, the cross stood, still, silent, present, but not passive. Something in it had begun to stir the world. And in that stirring, each of us was being tested, not with trials of fire, but with whispers. What do you believe? What do you carry? What will you kneel for? I didn't have answers, but I was starting to ask the right questions. And maybe that was the beginning of faith. Chapter 7. The Return. It had been nearly 20 years since I last stepped into a confessional. Even then, it was more habit than conviction, one of those half-hearted attempts to appease guilt that wouldn't stay quiet. But I remember the last time clearly. I was 18. I lied, told the priest what I thought he wanted to hear, walked out feeling nothing. This time was different. I don't remember what finally pushed me through the door. Maybe it was Clara's Bible. Maybe it was Theo's quiet faith. Maybe it was that night when the vandal collapsed before the cross and the sky went still. Or maybe it was that I was finally tired of running. Father Jules sat behind the screen. I knew it was him. Even before he spoke, his voice had the same weary kindness I'd grown up with. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," I whispered. "It's been 2 decades. The silence that followed wasn't judgment. It was a shelter. And then I spoke. I told him everything. The bitterness, the anger, the moments of cruelty, the apathy, the long, slow drift into nothingness. I told him how I mocked what I didn't understand, how I broke promises, how I forgot how to pray. At one point, I couldn't speak anymore. The words got tangled. My chest ached. My hands trembled. "I want to come home," I said, barely audible. Father Jules didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing. Then come home. "Son, come back." He offered absolution. I said the prayers. My voice cracked, but I said them. When I stepped out into the night air, it was like stepping into a world I hadn't seen in years. The trees looked taller. The stars seemed closer. I was still me, but something had changed. A week later, Father Jules announced a vigil. It would be held outdoors, around the cross, a night of silence, of prayer, of thanksgiving. We weren't sure how many would come. Bellbrooke wasn't exactly a pilgrimage site, but the word spread. On the night of the vigil, people started arriving before sunset. Families, widows, children clutching candles, a man on crutches, a woman carrying an urn. By the time darkness had fully fallen, over 200 people had gathered. The courtyard was lit only by flame. Candles lined the stone path. Lanterns hung from branches. The wind was gentle, the air warm, And in the center, as always, stood the cross. Father Jules began with a simple welcome. He didn't preach. He invited. We prayed together, some aloud, some in silence. Psalms were read, names were whispered, tears were shed. I knelt near the front, not leading, just there. At some point, the silence deepened, not in volume, but in presence. It was like the earth itself was listening. And then it happened. A light, soft, subtle. It didn't descend. It didn't blaze. It shimmered just above the cross, like dew catching moonlight, a glow with no source, no explanation. No one gasped. No one screamed. We just watched, and something in all of us settled. It only lasted a minute, maybe less. Then it faded, but the peace remained. After that night, the town was different. The cross was no longer just a relic. It was a witness to survival, to return, to grace. More people came, not tourists, pilgrims. We started a catechism class for returning Catholics. I volunteered to help. Me, a man who had cursed God, now teaching others about him. Clara would have smiled. I kept her Bible with me. It sat on the lectern as I spoke, her handwriting peeking from the pages. We didn't focus on rules. We spoke of mercy, of mystery, of presence. Some nights, we'd end by walking to the courtyard together, just to sit, just to be near. They built a small wooden sign near the church gates, the cross that wouldn't fall, not as an explanation, as an invitation, and people kept coming. One day, someone asked if we would build a shrine, erect a marble monument, add floodlights. We said no, let it stay how it was. Let the wind speak, let the silence shine. Sometimes, I still walk there alone. Late at night, I bring no candles, no prayers, just presence. And in that presence, I remember who I was, and I rejoice in who I'm becoming. Some nights, when the wind is low and the air is sweet with pine and dust, I walk the old path behind the church. The stones are familiar now, each one worn down by stories, by feet, by time. There's a quiet rhythm to the way the trees lean, the way the air stills before I turn the final bend and see it. The cross, just as it always is. Not brighter, not louder, just there. I've lived long enough now to understand that God doesn't always speak in lightning bolts or parted seas. Most days, He speaks in endurance, in what remains, in what cannot be moved. I used to wonder why faith had left me, why prayer felt empty, why silence hurt more than comforted. But maybe the better question was never why faith left, but why I stopped noticing where it stayed. Because even when I walked away, even when I turned my back, mocked it, buried it beneath doubt and loss, He didn't move. He was still there. The cross still stood. The town is quieter now. Not empty, just gentler. People still come, not in droves, not with cameras, but with candles, with questions, with tired hands and open hearts. I sit with them sometimes. We don't always speak, but that's the beauty of it. This faith that doesn't demand, but invites, that doesn't shout, but lingers, like incense after Mass, like the echo of a hymn long finished, still vibrating in the soul. We've added no marble, no plaque, just a wooden bench and a garden that grows wild around its base. Sometimes the birds land on its arms. Sometimes the wind carries whispers we swear we didn't start. I believe now, not because of the miracles, but because of the stillness, the kind that listens back. There is a line I wrote once in my journal, one I've since underlined a dozen times. Faith is not in what crumbles, it is in what never falls. It is not in the structures we build, but in the things that survive their ruin. Like love, like mercy, like a stone cross that would not fall. The other day, a child asked me, why did it stay up when everything else came down? I looked into her eyes, bright, unafraid, and I said, because sometimes God plants something deep enough to hold the whole world steady. She nodded, as if that made all the sense in the world. Maybe it did. I returned to Psalm chapter 46 now and then. Clara had it marked in her Bible, the page soft from use. Though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, God is our refuge and strength. Psalm chapter 46 verse 2. I believe that now, not in the way of a preacher, not even in the way of a saint, but in the way of a man who has fallen more than once, and found, every time, that the cross still stood. And so, at last, I stand too, and still, the cross stood, and so did we. Thank you for staying with me until the end. The cross that wouldn't fall reminds me that sometimes the quietest things hold the deepest strength. When everything else breaks down, faith can still remain, not loud, but steady. If this story touched you in any way, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel, give it a like, or share it with someone who needs a little hope tonight. I'll be back soon with another story. Until then, stay safe, stay open, and may peace always find you, even in the silence. See you in the next episode.